Hello everyone, this is Evie. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. I actually got like 80% way through filming this video, and then my battery died, and then it didn't save the video, so I have to refilm it. But anyways, what I would like to discuss today is my experience at Ropecraft San Antonio. For those of you who don't know, Ropecraft is a semi-annual bondage convention. One takes place in Chicago and the other one takes place in San Antonio. I've never been to the one in Chicago before. I actually have never been to a rope bondage specific convention before, so I thought it'd be fun and interesting today to share with you guys what my experience is, how is it different from other types of BDSM conventions, such as ones that are leather focused or ones that are more general, and just what I thought of it, the classes I took, my overall experience, what I thought of it, all that stuff. So if that sounds interesting to you, you are in the right place. So this particular story actually starts before I got to the convention. I got an email from Ropecraft, which I thought was really interesting, and they actually had you pre-select all of the classes that you wanted to attend. And for those of you who aren't familiar with conventions, usually what ends up happening is for the 2 full days of the convention, typically Saturday and Sunday, if not longer, they will have blocks of classes where for different time periods there will be 4 or 5 different options of different things that you can go and learn about. In other conventions I have been to, it's just whatever you feel like taking. You either go or you don't go, and you are free to leave and choose whatever. But with Ropecraft, they actually have you pre-register for all of the classes that you want to take. And for me, that was kind of stressful because it took them forever to get up a complete class list. First of all, the formatting of the website wasn't very helpful. It was hard to figure out what classes actually overlapped with each other and which ones didn't. All of the descriptions were good. It was again difficult to figure out, okay, when do I actually have to choose which classes I want to take? How do the descriptions match up, etc.? Is my skill level in the right place? All of that. And it was also a little bit frustrating because not only did you have to pick what classes you wanted to take, but by picking one specifically, you were automatically kind of disqualifying yourself from being able to get into the other ones. Actually, at the convention, there was some flexibility if you were willing to wait in a standby list and go somewhere else. But unless you had specifically said you wanted to go to one of the classes, it was not a guarantee that you would be able to attend one of them. So you really had to pick exactly in the moment before you were even at the convention or knew where the energy level was, or what classes you actually really wanted to take in a lot of cases, based on if you had maybe not been to the convention before or not taken classes from that particular educator before. And you had to do that, and you also had to pick what partner you were going with. And if you didn't pair up with a partner, you weren't both guaranteed to get a spot, which could lead to some sticky situations, and it was harder to get into classes if you were solo as opposed to paired. And it was, again, kind of a hot mess, if I'm being honest, in terms of how they had us register. Now, I get why they would have done that, because with rope bondage, because it's so participation focused, you want to make sure that you are keeping a good teacher to student ratio, and that everybody's going to have room to practice everything that they need to practice and have room for all their stuff. Whereas at a typical BDSM convention, it's less participatory and more focused on observing and watching and taking notes, so you have more room and more flexibility for people to be able to stand if they need to. There's usually more flexibility with getting more seating, as opposed to trying to be able to move an entire padoga into a classroom because they need one extra. It's just not going to happen. It's just not going to work logistically. So I understand it, but it was a little bit of more pressure than I was expecting, because I didn't know that that was how Ropecraft actually conducted everything. So we had to pick out all of our classes. They also actually had us do a lot of the registration materials beforehand, so we actually signed all of the waivers before we went to the convention. We signed off the release forms that we needed to, so that was actually convenient because there was a lot less waiting in line to do that, because a lot of times the first night of the convention is like an hour and a half of waiting to be able to register and signing things and filling out forms, which is not necessarily always the best way to start a convention, especially when you've already been standing around and sitting on a tarmac for 2 hours waiting to be able to disembark your plane that you've just traveled on. But anyways, that was basically how my experience got started, and then we actually flew out to the convention and arrived on Friday night. Typically the first first night of the convention will be opening ceremonies, and Ropecraft was no different in that regard, though it was a little bit different than your typical BDSM convention because with it being bondage focused, a lot of it is very performative. So in the evening, they had hors d'oeuvres out, they had snacks and drinks, and people would mingle as people were also watching live rope bondage performances by some people that are very well known in the scene and respected for putting on a good charismatic experience. This is also the time when you would go again to actually pick up your registration card and your actual ID tag, because even though you signed all the waivers, you actually need to have a badge present on you at all times, typically on a lanyard, to show that, hey, you paid for a ticket and you're allowed to be in this convention and you have consented to take photographs, so you're an attendee or a photographer or whatever. Something else that was really interesting on the first day I realized was you're actually allowed to take photos at Ropecraft, which I've never experienced at any of the conventions I've ever been to. Typically, they don't even really want you to have a phone out, much less be actively taking photos on it. They usually have you put like blue tape or something over it because for privacy reasons and for reasons of the safety and the comfort of others, you definitely don't want to be taking photos of like, oh, I see like my ex-girlfriend's at this convention, I didn't know she like kinky shit, and then, you know, put up like a bunch of revenge photos and email them to her work or whatever. And that could end up badly, so they try to avoid that by not allowing people to take photos willy-nilly. But with Ropecraft, because it's rope focused and a lot of it is very visual, a lot of the things that you're learning are very visual, taking pictures is really helpful. And basically the parameter was that you were allowed to take photos so long as everybody that was in the photos was consenting to be in them, and that if they were posted anywhere, they also consented for those photos to be posted, which definitely a lot of honor system with Ropecraft in comparison to other conventions I've been to, but I totally, again, understand why they did that. Now, after registering and getting some hors d'oeuvres and watching a few different scenes happening, there was actually an open dungeon, which again, typical for a convention, they'll usually have a shorter dungeon night after everything is said and done. And we did a little suspension in a net. We actually did a suspension in an animal capture net. We've had it for a while. It's kind of one of those things we pull out because it's fun and it's interesting and it's different, and it usually raises people's eyebrows a little bit because it's so different from what most people are doing, and I was actually really glad because the reception to it was generally positive. And it's a little bit worrisome going to a convention full of rope people because that's a very small segment of the BDSM population, and shibari and rope bondage as it is has a bit of a reputation for being elitist and snobbish, even among the very much elitist and snobbish BDSM community at large. And I do not mean that in a derogatory way, it's just typically people who are, you know, involved enough in BDSM to devote an entire weekend to it are going to be very, very devoted to it and very oftentimes have very strong opinions about it. But we didn't have anybody like giving us weird looks or sneers or like, what the hell is happening over there? Like, everybody thought it was like, oh, that's like different and new and I haven't seen anything like that before. And I was like, cool, these are people I can get along with and they can take a joke and they're not like super serious true shibari people, which was again a worry for me. And that's basically what we did for the evening. We were definitely dealing with some jet lag and some issues with energy levels, especially after being on a plane all day. So we basically did that, and then we took an early bedtime to get started on classes right away. The interesting thing about pre-registering for classes is even though we pre-registered for everything, they didn't send out notices of what classes you had actually gotten into until like 12:30 in the evening, the night before you were going to be taking the classes. So there wasn't really a lot of heads up on if you were going to be standby or participating or going as an auditor or not even in the class at all. Like, it was, again, a bit stressful going into that because we didn't know if we were going to get into any of the classes that we wanted. We didn't know if we were both going to be able to get in, if we were going to have to be on the standby list. And what ended up happening is we were actually on standby for the first class. And so I was really glad that Mr. Tex was able to check his email and see that before we went to bed, because it definitely changed our morning plans. Because the first class started at 10 a.m. and if we didn't know that we weren't going to be able to participate, we probably would have showed up right at 10 and not been able to get in. But because we were on the standby list, what we did instead was we showed up 40 minutes before the class was going to start just to wait outside, because we had heard from some of our friends that were going that this was the most popular class that they were going to have at the convention, and it definitely was. Even though we showed up 40 minutes early, we were not the first people in line on the standby list. By the time that the class was actually getting close to starting, the line for just the standby people wrapped almost around to the bathrooms. Like, there were probably at least 30 people in line, which for the size of the convention itself was like ridiculous. Like, nowhere else had standby lines that were that long, even for the other classes that were being taught by very popular instructors. And to make matters worse, because this is the first day and they haven't figured out a lot of the logistical things yet, they actually told us to wait in the wrong spot first, and then the different person who was coordinating the event told us to stand somewhere else, and then people cut in line and change spots and having people angry, and it's already the first class and people are stressed out and they're dealing with jet lag and all this other crap that's going on that happens with conventions. And then they have us almost change a third time because somebody didn't hear instructions correctly, and they were like, I'm the big volunteer, I know what I'm doing, and you have to listen to me. And it took like the actual like main organizer of the event coming over and be like, no, like, we fucked up, they are allowed to stay in the second place. I don't know why they told you to do it that way. That's not how it's supposed to be. And so it was like, okay, we're having some logistical problems here, and I kind of lost a bit of confidence after that, and I was really worried. Luckily, everything worked out, and despite definitely not being the first people in line, we did get in, and we were able to take the class and fully participate in everything. For those of you who are curious, the class was called Fuck That Box, and it was basically about how to do chest ties for suspension that aren't TKs. And TKs are it's called a box tie as well. And I don't do them because they involve my arms, and the way that they put pressure on my arms puts too much on my nerve location, so it typically isn't very comfortable for me, and it's in a tie that I like being in. So we went there to learn some alternatives, which we definitely did. The instructors were great, the rest of their participants were great, and as well, I do want to mention, everybody was dressed very practically. This is not like a lot of other BDSM conventions, so everybody is putting on their fanciest leather gear and their corsets and staying in a gag all day. People are mostly wearing athletic clothing because you're basically going to be tying all day long, the entire day of those classes. It's basically like a 2.5 day long rope intensive where for 8 hours you are doing rope, you are learning about rope, and you are doing stuff that's very active. So people are wearing active clothing. After the first class, which was an 1.5 hours long, there was a lunch break. We went and got lunch, we looked at the vendors. Oh, vendors. I actually wasn't expecting there to be vendors. There definitely was not the same selection as there would be at a general BDSM event. There was only like, I think, 5, but Minawashi was there, who's somebody who sells jute. There was Giotto, who sells bamboo and jute and hemp and BDSM gear and carabiners and all sorts of stuff, and books as well that were all related to rope bondage generally. And there was somebody, I think it was Painful Pleasures, I believe it was, that were selling wax play candles. If I can find a link to their store and all the other stores, I will put them in the description box if people are interested in checking them out, because we have rope from Giotto, we love it. We got candles from the Painful Pleasures place, loved it. Great candles. They had a really great selection as well, and definitely cheaper than a lot of the wax play candles that we have used before. And there were a couple of other like general BDSM convention people, I swear I see at every single convention, and they weren't really like, they were selling like pet play tails and ears, weighted gloves, and just non-rope bondage stuff, and even stuff for needles and knife play as well. Very interesting arrangement of different elements of play, even though it was at a rope bondage specific convention. But after lunch, it was the start of the longer half of the day, because there's the first class, and then after that are all 3 of the other blocks, which actually have a half an hour break between them, so it's not too bad. But the next class after that was not a participating class so much as it was a lecture, and there was definitely less soft skills classes. This is actually, I think, maybe the only one that we took that day that was a soft skills class, and it was about active bottoming, and it was from Second Floor Fete and Gaping Lotus, and it was actually very impressive because they managed to sink 2 hours of content into 1 hour. You can tell they were definitely pressed for time, but it was basically a conversation about how to prepare for bottoming, how to be an active bottom, how to communicate, basically just how to be a good rope bottom. And I thought it was a very enjoyable class, and it was actually one of the only classes I took notes during, because I was like, I understand what's going on here. This is valuable information. I want to make sure to continue this conversation. And Second Floor Fete and Gaping Lotus have great chemistry, and they're also really good teachers, and I think they have a very informed, very interesting perspective on rope bondage. So that was the second class, and then after that was intermediate suspension from Giotto, and that was basically what it sounds like, he more or less took suggestions from people about like, where is your skill level at? What do you want to learn? Because it's different in every area of the country. What is intermediate to California is not the same as Rhode Island. It's not the same as Texas. It's not the same as Minnesota. Because everybody has different communities where different skill levels are considered advanced or intermediate, or even the opportunities to learn things can very much impact what is perceived as advanced or not advanced or intermediate or not. So I like that he definitely tailored the class. Again, there were some logistical issues, particularly with the size of the classroom. Even though we were put in as participants, which meant that we were supposed to be able to have our complete own like space, we were guaranteed to have a space. There were actually 6 hard points to tie off to, but then there were 12 couples. So how was that going to work for an intermediate suspension class when there's twice as many bottoms who need to be suspended as there are points to suspend them from? So that was a bit of an issue to work through. We actually almost left because we were like, why are we going to go to this class if we can't actually do anything in it and we're just going to watch? It's not like as helpful for the learning process, but it managed to get worked out, and they came up with a solution so that most everybody who wanted to would have a turn at tying versus just observing, and it ended up working out, and it was a really helpful class, and we learned a few new tips and tricks to add to our rope bondage skill bag. At this point, it's like 4 p.m., and I am definitely having energy problems. The first day was definitely a low energy day. I was dealing with not having enough protein, and particularly because we're in Texas and I'm a vegetarian, and there are not a lot of good vegetarian options by an airport in San Antonio for a vegetarian. So it was difficult to actually get like proper fuel to actually feel like doing rope bondage for 6 hours or 8 hours a day. So I was definitely feeling it by the almost last class, which was Hojo Fusion Suspension, which, those of you who don't know, Hojo Jutsu is a specific type of rope bondage that is specifically meant for quickly restraining and typically painfully restraining somebody who is fleeing, and basically it's supposed to put them in a dangerous position where they don't fight the rope, because doing so would impinge typically their ability to breathe. And this one was done very thoughtfully, where not only was it Hojo Jutsu, but it was also a suspension for the specific purpose of breath play. And I don't necessarily want to get into the specifics of what that means and what that looks like, because I don't feel comfortable talking about breath play, but I was actually very surprised that they allowed it at the convention, because typically they don't allow breath play at all in dungeons or at conventions, let alone have an entire class about it. But it was very thoughtfully done. They did a great job of going over the risks and how to tell, if the tie was going to be structurally sound or not, if it was going to be properly executed. But it was definitely an advanced class, and that's something that I really picked up on the first day. Is you had everything from a basic soft skills class all the way up to a very advanced, almost custom-made tie. Like, there were a very wide variety of classes you could take at this convention, and that actually really impressed me, especially considering that a lot of the people who were supposed to be teaching at the convention weren't able to make it because of a storm that was happening on the East Coast at the time. Now, by the time that we wrapped up the first day of classes, like I mentioned before, I was definitely dealing with low energy. I was kind of feeling off. I was still feeling a little bit jet lagged and tired. We did actually end up going to the dungeon again for the evening and practicing a little bit and going through a few things, because surprisingly enough, even though it was the first day of the convention, like the first full day, most people were actually watching performances in a different area as opposed to using the dungeon right away. So like for the first entire hour of when dungeon space was open, there was almost nobody in the dungeon space. And I should actually make note, something that was really interesting to me about how they had this set up was not only was there a dungeon space and a performance space, there was also a full day long practice space. So if there wasn't a class that you wanted to attend, or you just wanted to take time to work on something from a class you just took, there was an entire space dedicated to not scenes, but practicing. You actually specifically weren't allowed to do scenes there. There was also an entire separate photography area. So if you wanted to take photos, you could do that in that specific room, because it had better lighting as opposed to kind of the dim, more traditional dungeon lighting that you'll see at most other conventions. But we did a little bit in the dungeon space, and then basically we went to bed after that. It wasn't anything too involved or too exciting, and I say that, but it was definitely, I had a lot of emotional experiences that evening because we were just working through so many things with our rope bondage, with trying new things and working on skills that we had already learned and combining them in new ways, and just being around this like very unique new energy that I personally had not really been through a lot of before. So we went to bed early, and then it was time for Sunday already. This convention actually went by really fast because we were flying, so we weren't able to stay for the entire full time. It just felt so much more compressed than my experiences at like Dark Odyssey or Kink Fest have been. I'm not really sure why that is, but it felt really compressed because it was just back to back to back stuff all day long, very active, very focused. And luckily, the second day of classes got off to a lot better start than the first. This is actually my favorite class that I took during the convention. It was an Agora Tie, which is a cross-legged tie that was built specifically for sustainable transition suspension. So basically it's something that is easy to be in for a long period of time and that can be used for a variety of different positions in a suspension. This again was taught by Second Floor Fet and Gaping Lotus, and this is another one of those very complicated ties. It's definitely a more advanced tie, but it was so thoughtfully done. The instruction was great. They actually did something that I thought was really interesting, because at least in our local community, people are like very active and vocal about like critiquing your work constantly, even when you don't ask for it. But with them, what they did was, we're going to show you the tie, I'm going to show you me tying it on myself, I'm going to show my partner tying it on me, and then I'm going to be tying it on somebody else too. So everybody gets a chance to see it tied on in a bunch of different ways and from a bunch of different angles and used in different ways. And I was like, that's great. They did that, and then they also walked around the room, and if you wanted to, you could ask them for advice about what you were doing, if you forgot a step, if you had a question about how it was constructed, or how maybe you could modify it to fit your partner's body. Very helpful. And honestly, the first time I went up in that Agora Tie, I was like, never take me out of this. This is the best. I was like, this feels great. This is all the things that I typically really enjoy about being in bondage in one tie. Let us do this all the time, even though it takes like 20 minutes or whatever to put on, because very involved tie, especially the first few times doing it, you're probably going to forget a little bit about it, even if after you've seen it 3 or 4 times. But that was the first class. We went out to lunch with some friends who were attending the convention, and we went to a little Mexican place and had some horchata, and we had some churros, and it was good stuff. It was good stuff. Again, not a lot of vegetarian options for me, but I did manage to get a protein bar from a gas station, so I was feeling a lot better on the second day in terms of my energy level, because I wasn't at like 0 protein, all physical exertion, which is like the worst possible situation to be in for this type of setting. Everything was good. We went to lunch and we came back, and then we took the rest of the classes for the day. Then the next class that we took was called Bringing Creative Back into Your Kink. This was a more of a discussion-based class. It was more of a soft skills class, which honestly I thought was a really great way to actually wrap things up, I guess, because it was a way of saying, okay, you've learned all of these skills. How do you bring them back into your kink? How do you bring life back into your BDSM? How do you get stuck out of your rut? I think that's such an important conversation to have, and I've talked about it on my channel before, but it was a really great way of getting some new ideas, of getting different perspectives on how to do that, different people's experience, and more or less it was just people getting more and more sadistic and bringing out their most personally sadistic ideas, and it was fantastic, and I loved it, and I wish I could share all of the things that people brought up in that class, because it was like people going like springing off of each other, getting great ideas, sharing stories, and really, but by the time I was out of it, I was like, we don't have any issues with being creative in our kink. Like, look at all these crazy ideas that you can just do. You don't have to put yourself in a box. Fuck that box. Like the first class of the day, fuck that box. Do not put yourself in a box. Do you want? Be creative. Be yourself, do kink that speaks to you, be that a 15-minute scene or an hour-long scene. But before I get on that particular soapbox, let's move on to the last part of the convention, because like I mentioned, this convention seemed very compressed to me. Because what ended up happening, and this is maybe something that even required its own video, but actually there were only 2 classes on Sunday. The last actual class or classes were something called Rope in Space, and it's really an unconvention. Basically, it's a room full of people who put up a board with different time slots of when things are going to be available and what they're going to be teaching in which area. And then people either put up suggestions of what they're going to be teaching or what they would like to learn, and then people gather. You're free to come and go as you please to attend other classes or something's not really speaking to you. Very intimate and interactive, and it's a really great way of getting a personalized experience. We actually first took a class from somebody. It's also a great opportunity for peer educators, by the way, if you're interested in getting teaching experience in BDSM. I personally was like, I don't even know what I would talk about. I did not prepare for this, so I didn't teach anything, and honestly, I was having way too much fun taking classes, and I was like, I don't even really want to talk about anything. I just want to learn more. So I went and we did So we went and then we watched a 360-degree ladder suspension, which is basically somebody who is doing a double dragon back or a double ladder tie on their legs, and how to do a suspension where throughout it you are actually transitioning around 360 degrees, which was awesome and gave me a lot of really cool ideas. Then the very last class that we took was a suspendable prayer tie from Giotto again, and this was very innovative. I was like, yes, more arm ties I can use that aren't TKs. This is an awesome weekend. I'm so glad that we did this, and especially combined with the cross-legged Agora tie, I think this is going to be a great thing foundationally for us to be able to incorporate in our bondage set. I've personally never done before, so I took that class, and more interesting ties for my particular repertoire and for Mr. Tex. But then it was over. It was already done. I couldn't believe it. Rope and Space was done after that for us. It actually continued on for several more hours after we had left, but we actually had to catch a plane at, like, I think 7 is when the plane was leaving, so we had to leave and go through security and go back home. And that was basically my experience at Ropecraft San Antonio, besides some specific logistical issues. The beginning, especially for coordinating classes, I thought it was a great event. There was plenty of opportunities to learn, plenty of classes for all kinds of skill sets to be able to attend, lots of very thoughtful presenters, lots of very interesting classes, lots of different things that you could learn. I liked that I was in the hotel. I liked the vendors that were there. It was something I would definitely go to again, because there aren't really a lot of rope bondage conventions out there, so I don't have a lot of experience of what I could compare it to. I think it was a great time, and even though it made me really tired, and I am still very tired, it was worth every moment. So if you guys have any comments or questions about Ropecraft San Antonio or any other kink convention I've been to, please feel free to put that down in the comment section below. I would love to hear from you all. If you guys want to learn more about Ropecraft and how to survive going to conventions and some other tips and tricks, I will put that down in the description box. If you want to see more from me and pictures of some of the rope bondage I learned, highly recommend that you check out my social media. I will put that in the description box as per usual. And finally, if you would like to support this channel because you like this video and you want to help me make better videos and have access to cool exclusive content, highly recommend you check out my Patreon and see about supporting me there. I will put a link to that down below. And until I see you guys next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.